I thought I was just taking an Uber home, the kind of ride you don't even remember once it's over, until the driver looked at me through the rearview mirror and casually said my husband's name, followed by a detail about his late-night routine that no stranger should ever know. And in that instant, my stomach dropped because I realized this man knew something about my marriage that had been deliberately hidden from me. And by the time the car pulled to a stop, I already understood that whatever truth was about to come out would permanently change how I saw my husband, my home, and my entire life. That evening started like so many others, quiet, uneventful, and emotionally numb in the way long marriages sometimes become without you noticing. I ordered an Uber, slid into the back seat, and let my thoughts drift as the city lights blurred past the window. The driver was polite but silent, which I appreciated because silence feels safe when you're tired. But about halfway through the ride, he broke it in a way that made my chest tighten. He asked if I was married to my husband by name, and I remember forcing a small laugh, assuming maybe my husband had ordered rides for me before. But then the driver continued, mentioning how often he drove my husband late at night, and that word late echoed in my head because my husband had been coming home later and later for months, always with a reason that sounded logical enough to accept. And before I could stop myself, I asked where he usually dropped him off, expecting an office building or a hotel, but instead he named an address I didn't recognize, not even close to where my husband claimed to work. And he said it with the casual familiarity of someone repeating a routine. My pulse started racing, my palms grew damp, and I asked how long this had been happening. And that's when the driver hesitated, glancing at the road as if weighing his words, then quietly said he'd driven my husband dozens of times, always between midnight and early morning, always to that same location. And suddenly my mind began replaying every night I'd eaten dinner alone, every unanswered call, every excuse I'd swallowed because trust felt easier than suspicion. The car felt smaller, the air heavier, and I realized that what unsettled me most wasn't just the information, it was how normal the driver sounded saying it. Like this hidden version of my husband had been living in plain sight while I slept peacefully beside a stranger. And when the Uber finally stopped in front of my house, I stepped out, knowing I could never return to the comfort I'd had before I got into that car. If this moment made your heart race, make sure to like and subscribe because the truth was only just beginning to surface. I didn't confront my husband that night. Not because I was calm, but because fear has a way of paralyzing you when your entire reality feels unstable. Instead, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the driver's voice until morning light filled the room. And once my husband left for work, I did something I had never done before. I started searching, quietly, methodically, hoping I was wrong with every click. I checked our shared bank statements first and noticed small ride charges scattered across weeks, always late, always clustered around the same times. Then I logged into our Uber account, something I hadn't touched in years, and there it was, undeniable and neatly organized, a digital record of deception, ride after ride, all between midnight and 4 a.m., all going to the exact address the driver had mentioned. My hands shook as I typed the address into a search engine, and when the results loaded, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a workplace. It wasn't a client site. It was a private residence tied to another woman. And in that moment, the driver transformed in my mind from a stranger into a silent witness, someone who had unknowingly watched my husband live a double life from the front seat of his car, while I trusted blindly from our bed. What disturbed me most wasn't just the betrayal, it was how effortlessly the truth existed, logged in timestamps and GPS data, waiting patiently for someone to notice. I realized then how fragile the illusion of privacy really is, how we convince ourselves that deleting messages or offering excuses erases reality, when in truth, the evidence simply waits. And by the time my husband walked through the door that evening, smiling like nothing was wrong, I wasn't suspicious anymore. I was armed with proof, and the shock wasn't fading, it was solidifying into something cold and irreversible. If this discovery hit close to home, like and subscribe, because the confrontation was the moment everything collapsed. When I finally confronted him, I didn't yell or cry. I simply asked where he'd been the night before, and he gave me the same rehearsed explanation I'd heard so many times. Work ran late, meetings dragged on, nothing unusual. And that's when I calmly repeated the Uber driver's words, including the address, exactly as they had been said. And I watched his confidence dissolve in real time, the color draining from his face, his posture stiffening, the lies scrambling to survive. He tried to deflect at first, accusing me of invading his privacy, of being paranoid. But when I placed my phone on the table with the ride history open, the silence became unbearable. Because evidence doesn't argue, it simply exists. And in that moment, I realized that betrayal doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it reveals itself quietly, through data, patterns, and strangers who have nothing to gain from lying. My marriage didn't explode in anger. It collapsed under the weight of truth. And as I packed my things that night, I understood something deeply unsettling. The most dangerous lies aren't the ones we suspect, they're the ones we trust. And the lesson I walked away with wasn't just about infidelity or deception, it was about awareness, about how easily our lives can be compartmentalized without us noticing, and how the truth doesn't always come from the people closest to us. Sometimes it comes from a stranger we almost ignore, from a routine we never question, from a car ride we assume is ordinary. That Uber didn't just take me home, it took me out of a lie I might have lived in forever. If you believe the truth always finds its way out, even when it rides in the back seat, like and subscribe for more stories that expose what we're never meant to see.